Mach 3, give me cruise show on 2, 3, and 4.
Line 1, X1.
6, 3. Mach 3, give me start line 2.
5 electric. Mach 3.
Mach 3, give me start line 1 and cruise show on 7 and 9.
Line 1, cruise show 7 and 9, Mach 3.
Yeah, do something. I hate that.
Super Ops, line 3, Reservoir, Avionics.
Super Ops. Line 7 is code 3 for light in the gear handle.
Fuck. Hey, so I started a Patreon because frankly, this stuff's getting expensive. Nothing will change the podcast or the blog if you don't subscribe, but if you want early access to episodes, monthly AMAs, episode shoutouts, voting on podcast topics, and all kinds of 20 Years Done gear, head over to patreon.com/20yearsdone. This month's top tier Patreon shoutout goes to Kevin Traw, Robbie Walker, Travis Barnes, JT Owens, and Delinda Baker. Thanks for the support. So today I'm joined by Mike McDowell, a gentleman who recently got his doctorate from University of Southern California, and his dissertation was primarily focused on veteran transition from service to the civilian sector. I first met Mike in 2019 at a conference in Las Vegas when I was working for a university here in Maine. It was a conference for institutions of higher education and their veteran services programs and policies. And Mike was in the back in the audience, and after a private university happened to present their veterans, the program that was really impressive, Mike was a much better critical thinker than I, because he asked a targeted and well-placed question of how much did this program cost, and immediately disarmed them, and they were unwilling to talk about the price. And then he fired back with something to the effect of, so now you're just kind of bragging, because the whole point of this is to like collaborate and share how you achieve these sorts of programs and these milestones. And if you're not telling us how much money it costs, there's a lot of universities just can't afford to do what you did. And then it's not useful. And then later on, Mike presented at the same conference on a topic that I didn't know about, and now I'm realizing it probably affects a lot of veterans, and it was a topic called moral injury. And if Mike has time, I'll probably be asking him to come back on and talk about that as well, because I was absolutely enthralled by that conversation. What we're going to talk about today is his research and company called Valor Club U.S.A. that he's the CEO and the founder of, correct? And a lot of that is based on his research. So I guess if you can just give us a brief overview of your research, what motivated you to do it, and kind of what you discovered.
Well, thanks, Chris. I believe in synchronicity. I think everything happens for a reason. You grind out a $1 million problem practice, where you're thinking of, God, we could just do it better in one way, or this is being done. And my focus for my doctoral work went with an EDD, and the EDD part, the educational doctorate, is more, it's scholarly based, but it's also practitioner based. And so for me as a person, research, I love research, but I absolutely love it. And I love learning about evidence-based research, because it allows us to really assess where we're at in terms of solving problems. So that's one of the reasons I decided to go back to school 3 years ago and really start the doctorate. I really didn't think I was in the veteran space, as you know, when I was with the Soldiers Project, when I went to Vegas, and I was in this transition, but I wanted something that was applicable. I felt like the space found me by dumb luck. It wasn't anything that I did, but it's really been an incredible road of a lot of learning. And I'm honored and certainly happy to be done with that particular phase. But it is just a phase. You're not going to change anything on that dissertation in terms of, leaving a legacy. But it's a way to show that you're scholarly and that you have that application. You can write well, as working through your postgrad. Your ability to write and articulate yourself is so important, and it's only going to get better with practice. So I'm really, really happy about that. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. It's a huge accomplishment for sure. As somebody that recently separated from the military, did my own transition, I feel like I did relatively well. But because of my work helping first generation low income veterans get into college, I could definitely see that my relative success transitioning was not the norm, it felt like, or at least not what I was seeing anymore. So when I saw your call for survey participants, I absolutely wanted to contribute. And so I guess the first question I'll ask is, How well does the DoD prepare service members to transition to the civilian sector?
Whew. Now there's a dissertation of itself.
I think that is your dissertation, right?
In a way, I studied two problems of practice, essentially. The first one that I was very interested in during the lit review, just gathering information at the time, was really what are the knowledge, motivation, organizational influences affecting transitional vets, right? So we know, and my expertise is in educational psychology. So it's about learning. And particularly with non-traditional learners, because we learn differently than people who are in secondary school and then early, 18 to 22 range versus, we bring in so much more context in terms of the world. Yeah, we haven't been in a classroom necessarily like a kid who's right out of high school, but we offer our whole world lens is completely is just shaped. We have different priorities and everything else. So the problem of practice for me was, well, first of all, why do some veterans do fine and other ones don't? And I assumed early on it was just a PTSD function, when in actuality, that's not what my research has shown. It's actually shown it's a failure to reassimilate. So what we're trying to focus on is really understanding the transition in terms of, those first and second termers, as they come in 17, 18 years of age. They don't have a context or what we call in academia a schema. They don't know how to live autonomously as an independent adult. So when we get them, we put them on yellow footprints. We immediately, cut their hair, and we, the group's more important than the individual, and yada, 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 through that 13-week or 12-week process through that boot camp initiation. And of course, that's a complete incorporation of everything from new language to rank structure and how to live. So when they do that time, and let's say they do 4 years, great years, they've deployed once or whatever, and then we put them back into circulation in terms of the reentry experience, and they're just not prepared for that. They don't know. There's just a lot that we have to unpack with that. Not that the effort by the DoD, to answer your question in a very broad,
right,
probably wordy that needs to be done, it just doesn't align. It's not aligned effectively, and at the end of the day, there's no assessment on it. How do we know we're being successful? I mean, anything you do in educational, learning at all is all based upon, you have a level of knowledge up front. You have one in the middle during the middle of the course, whether that's a unit, whether that's a semester. And then at the end, you're assessed at the back end to know whether or not you're being successful. Because guess what? We may not be teaching it right. And if that's the case, we need to adjust, which is not a personal issue. It's an issue of assessment, analysis. Maybe you are doing a great job. Well, again, we're going to figure that out too. So there is no assessment during that during that period of that 1 week course that's actually run by the Department of Labor. It's not a DoD function. I think the entities are there to be successful in terms of the commitment by the DoD. But remember, that's not their responsibility. Their responsibility is warfighting. Yep. It's the ability to get these people ready for battles unseen. And then the transition into VA, which is supposed to be, is getting more and more. Yes, the barrier is getting smaller and smaller, but it's still not there, because if only 60% by research is showing us 60% of people actually use it, and I'm talking about post 9/11 vets, 40% of those people aren't entering into the program.
You talking about for VA?
Yeah, for VA. And so we don't know where they're at. So when we're trying to push resources out, I look at the lens of California, where I've been in the last 4 years. I got 5,000 homeless vets in LA County. 4,500 square miles of this real estate. And our job as leaders is to get people, resources out, and with a 4,500 square mile, where these veterans are, they're not where the VAs are. That's the challenge. And we try to put Band-Aids on, with satellite clinics and those kind of things. But you just can't look at it as a single soda straw. You got to look at it comprehensively, and that's what we have to do together better.
What's really interesting too is when you're talking about the military, they try to remove as many distractors, and if you're young, they give you a place to live. They give you a card to go eat as much as you want, kind of. Even when you come to PCS, they hand you your plane tickets if you're going from one duty station to another or what have you. If you're deploying, it's usually as a big group where you just follow the adult that's in front of you, and at the front there's a actual adult that knows what's going on. He's kind of leading the trail behind him, and then when they transition out of the military, they've socially atrophied for 4 years, because the point of the military is to remove all of these sort of requirements for you to allocate all of your mental resources towards the warfighting effort, whatever that might be, whatever your MOS or AFSC was. And that I can absolutely see how that plays into when you get transitioned out. You have a lot of underdeveloped cognitive and social sort of traits that when you go into the civilian sector, your age peers have been functioning with those added sort of, requirements, and they've exercised those thoughts and those actions that it's much easier for them to. And I hadn't thought about that until we talked.
No, and that's spot on. And at the end of the day, the research is showing us that divorce, that EAS or, ETS or, whatever branch service we're in, that period is the period of divorce. We're divorced of our tribe or our community. And that community is how we survive battles. You go out on a patrol, you ain't getting back by yourself. The family, the group, whether you like each other or not, your survival depends on each other. Now you're going out and thrown in, we have, Chris or Mike leaves the service, and now you've got all these benefits, all these things that are all siloed, by the way. And by the way, they're not geographically focused in terms of if people are, we're doing a better job, I think, with information flow. But the problem is there's no sharing of information. I don't know what you've done in terms of the mental health side. One of the things that I've really liked, I used Dick Clark's and Ed.D.'s gap analysis profile, a program that they've developed over time. And it's done for everything from education to corporate. You can use it for anything, but it's to find out what are the real assets and what are the real gaps. And the model is really interesting. And I really fell in love with it because you can use it for anything, as I said. And so when we study the three components, again, is it a knowledge functionality? Are they short, or are they assets of that? Or are they not motivated? And motivation isn't like a bumper sticker. Motivation involves many, many different things in terms of, do you have attribution? Do you have emotional interest in that? Are you focused on, is it intrinsic motivation? Is it extrinsic motivation? Is it focused on what are the values to it? Do you see utility value? Why would anybody want to go to grad school and be a lawyer? You're not going to have a life for freaking 3 years. So if you're not in it for the right reasons intrinsically, you're never going to make it. And that's the thing about people saying, "Oh, you're a doctor now." Anybody can get these degrees. It's not hard. It's just persistence.
Yep.
And you're not going to have a life for 3 years. You're going to be sitting on your porch like I did, reading and writing every single night, doing stuff. But again, it's something I love. And so I'm willing to do that. So again, that's utility value. Is there a cost value with it? I'm going to drive a junker car until, if you're going to school right away, you're not going to afford that brand new car. You're going to have to buy a used one with 100,000 miles on it to get through school so you can get a better job, the whole story. So that's the other component. And then the last one is the organizational component. What are the organizational gaps in terms of resources, in terms of policies, procedures, processes, cultural settings, cultural model, and then cultural settings that are very different in terms of going into a corporate environment. I can tell you right now, the research I received from, you and others, it blew my mind because we're not framing this right. We're throwing it out there, hoping it sticks. DOD's kind of got we did it. Here's the week, check. Government, here's representatives, we've done this, we seek. Now they have front end data on the front end, and they say, well, we have by law have to have 85% of our active duty service members, which we got, but we didn't get reservists. We didn't, in 2015 and 16 when they did the legislative, the Congress, really analyzed it in terms of the Auditor General, when they're looking through those things, they failed that, and that was a real black eyes. But yeah, we can tell you that you're getting 85%. Which is 200. Let's say you got 85% of 200,000, because there's 200,000 that transition every year. So you got 80% of them that go there. Okay, great. Well, did they learn anything?
Yeah. What did they get out of it? You 85% sat in the seat for the 5 days or whatever. But how many of them successfully applied to a college or moved to where they wanted to live, secured housing, have transportation, are food secure, got a job that is at their capabilities? They're not under, they're not working at Starbucks or something. That's not a knock on people at Starbucks, but I imagine most service members, that's not their aim and their goal. Yeah. And if we're not capturing that data, then what is That seems bizarre to me that we are. I mean, what is the cost of sending every 85% of, we'll just say every service member to TAPS for 5 days? There's a man-hour cost there, and people like me, I went to TAPS twice. I went once like a year out, and then maybe 6 or 7 months before I finally retired. You know, the manpower cost, the Department of Labor person coming in, you know, people coming up per diem, the facilities, all that stuff. How much money are we spending? And it seems so bizarre to me that we aren't making sure that we're getting our money's worth by assessing the success of veterans on the back end.
Well, and that's exactly it. And again, that's social capital costs. Okay. And you and I have talked about this before, again, offline. You know, how do you measure a program that's preventative, right? That's what we're trying to do. Because I can tell you, you can look on the back end reactionarily in a deficit lens and say, we have X amount of, you know, take Los Angeles, I got 5,000 homeless vets. Now that's all eras. So there's not just, you know, one, which is again, a PIT, which is point in time, you know, numbers. So we don't even really think that's accurate, but it's something, you know, as we all get online, it's like the lost pair of, you know, NVGs get online and, you know, through the field at, you know, 0-2, we got to find them, you know, and then you count them and then you do your estimations and all that. But the question is what is alarming to me is that Syracuse did a study, because this isn't even just about mental health, behavioral health, you know, services in terms of the TAP experience. They said 43% of all of our veterans will not have a 1-year anniversary in their first job.
Yep.
Okay. 72, I think it was 72% will not have a 2-year anniversary in their first job. So when you're looking at this, you know, all these stakeholders, you know, in this social capital model, we need to have them employed. The companies want them employed. They need them. Let's just say right now that vocational trades, particularly manufacturing, they can't hire enough fast enough.
It's true.
You know, so you have that issue, which is a sunk cost, by the way, because we've monetized it at the Valor Club. Because for me, I know that if Chris leaves work before that first year at Starbucks or wherever, it's going to take me between 15 and 30,000 to backfill you. And that is all about search costs. That's, you know, for candidates, it's bringing all the people that are on the hiring committee together. They got to stop what they're doing. They got to be able to engage, you know, bringing these people in, whether you got to fly them in, whether you're doing all this stuff. So it's in the company's best interest to find the best candidate they have that is intrinsically motivated, right? Yep. We talk about that, not about money. It's about finding that right job. So when people say, well, what do you want to do? Well, I want to be an electrician. Well, that's fantastic. You know, why do you want to be an electrician, Chris? Well, because they make a lot of money.
Yep.
Well, that's not an intrinsic motivator because, oh, by the way, you said here in the statement, you're sick of, you're an infantry guy. You're sick of being outside. You know, the weather, you want the nice. Guess where you're going to be in the winter? You're not going to be inside. You're going to be outside doing outside stuff. So for us, we want to, again, tie that in with the alignment of the interest of the candidate, which may or may not know now. You know, Who told him to be an electrician? Well, my dad was that. I just figured I'd do it. Dude, you're not going to make that. That's too much pain on the end. Now, if they're motivated intrinsically, great. That's a factor of 20. We know, but those are important things because if we can show, you know, assessment data, follow on data all the way through, even after you leave the Valor Club. So you come in, you're looking for an affordable place to live. You're going to go, you know, you're interested in a few things. Let's walk the dog through there. Let's get you with an educational programmer from any school, you know, that you might be interested in, whether that's vocational. You want to be in we got several corporate partners that want to train people, plumbers and, you know, pipe fitters and carpenters and electricians, and then get you tied into there so that you can see if that's really what you want to do. And then what we're going to do is surround you with VSOs and other people that you will need to have, because the companies, we want to work with the companies. They want the vets, but they don't know if they know how to get them, or if the veterans are even interested in that, you know, like manufacturing. We got a train wreck coming in this country, and that has to do with not demand of product. It's about being able to produce it. And with 20% of our workforce, as you and I have spoke about before, going to be over the age of 65 by 2024.
Yep.
Those are your SMEs. Those are your mid managers, senior managers, executive leaders. And so we can't even fill the front end, yet alone the back end. And so that's why, again, these young people have so much opportunity, but I just don't think we're framing it right collectively. And I think we can do a better job.
Yeah, that's a good point too. And I'm sure it fared it out. when we did our interview before, but I'm pretty close to the data anyway. I've had 3 jobs since I separated in 2018. The first one I had for 7 months. The second one I had for 28 days. And the third one I had for, I think, 9 months. And the third one was working in higher education. The pay wasn't great, but it was super rewarding work. And the only reason I left was because I was going to law school. And that was like where all of my intrinsic sort of motivation lied. The other 2 were, it paid a bunch of money. And I didn't have a drive and a loyalty to it. And I was always seeking what I'm doing now, which is, going to law school to eventually be a lawyer. So those things didn't hold. There was no chance of them holding me at all whatsoever.
Well, but let's be honest. I mean, almost half of our population of the 200,000 are married or they have dependents. So their focus isn't, if you're a single guy or a woman and you can live in your car. I mean, you got a lot of flexibility. The challenge comes is when you're married, have children, you got to provide something here. So again, you talk about stress levels. The other thing that was really, really interesting in the research, the findings, is that I had over 50, I think it was 54% of our veterans that we had of the 160 that I interviewed for this quantitative side, which is a big fat word for just a survey. 54% did not think they were going to go into a company that understood them. Okay. Over 50% believed that, or maybe it was even more, I think it was like 55% believed that they weren't going to get a company that would give them time off for the special, unique needs that they needed. Which again, we talk about cultural competency. That was one of the things I focused on of the knowledge, motivation, organizational influences. But that is a two-way street. That may open up opportunities where we go to these companies and say, listen, you're wondering why you can't get vets. Now that's okay. That's a legitimate problem of practice. Okay. Let's see if we can unpack this. Is it a function of marketing? Are you marketing to the right people at the right locations? Yes, no, maybe. Or is it an educational function? Are veterans staying away from manufacturing because they think it's like grandpa's job as at Ford for 40 years, on assembly line, putting tires on axles? It's not like that. You work for an Amazon or you work for an innovative software company and you're on the line doing manufacturing. You first of all can't even get in there unless you're trained. Number 2, you're about looking at automated systems and robots and, mechanical thing. I mean, so that would be an education functionality shortfall. So then we need to go back and then get on these bases to say, hey, listen, that's what you can do. And that's why we're really committed to apprenticeships at the Valor Club, because we want them, I would love nothing more than, Chris coming in, want to be an electrician. Great. Well, we're going to sit you down with somebody. You're going to bird dog left seat, right seat for a week and see if it's a fit, because we don't want to have you invest your hard-earned VA benefits to something you're not going to go into at the end after being in it for 3 months going, God, I just don't like this cold. I mean, I got a shoulder problem and it's locking up, and let's get you into IT maybe, or where you can make good coin. I mean, literally in 6 months to a year, ideally, if we can get them, most of those places have like, 2-year associate's degrees, kicked into them, but we have connections at Port of San Antonio, who's literally bringing in a lot of companies and other types of innovation as an innovation, kind of a startup, so they can start companies. So those are some really, again, interesting things. And I think there was another opening, particularly with older vets, as we've talked about. I tried to grab, transition service members with the initial design of my work. I had to expand it into people who have already been out for up to 3 years. And I need that for numbers, because ideally with time and some of the other constraints that I had, DOD locks everything like that up. You have to go through all the, authorizations for.
Trust me, I know.
And so I didn't have that time to wait 6 months to get that authorization. I could have, and I will in the future, but I just extended it. But it was really a blessing, because I was able to see that a lot of these veterans, particularly ones that have been out, they've done 20 years. They were colonels or lieutenant colonels or whatever they were, sergeant majors. They have a lot of issues too. They have unique issues. A lot of them have identity challenges, because people, as an 06 or a, E9, and now you're Joe Snuffy at the PFC level. Not saying that, they're going to go into mid-management, but no one's going to, they're just mid-manager levels. I mean,
Yep.
they're nothing, they're not O6s like they were. So that doesn't mean that they can't get to that level in several years with, proven work, which most of them probably do. But it was just as another interesting thing.
No, I can see that. And I think I had that epiphany a little bit too. I can't remember if we talked about this offline or not. But probably like 6 months before I retired, like I had the notion in my head that I was a good leader. I had 20 years of leadership in the military, and I would be able to take that leadership toolkit from the military, and I'd be able to walk in the civilian sector, and I would be a great leader there too. But the problem is that your leadership toolkit in the military, there might be some emotional intelligence and some, charisma that comes with that. But there's also like ridiculously coercive power you have in the military where you tell someone to do something, and if they don't do it, they go to jail. Like that doesn't exist.
NJP is amazing.
Like that doesn't exist. Like, and you can work your people 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And if they say no, you can make them go to prison, which means what you get is you get a lot of leaders that think they're good. But the reality is whether they are overtly exerting that authority or the personnel below them are just understanding that that could be an outcome. So they, kind of defer to that authority anyway. That doesn't exist in the civilian sector. And I think a lot of people, part of that identity is they expect things their way. And then when they move to the civilian sector, they don't have as much clout as they had in the military. They've identified with that rank and that sort of culture for 20 plus years or whatever it might be. And their toolkit can certainly be shoehorned in the civilian sector, but it takes somebody recognizing where it lacks and where it excels and then kind of fitting it in and slotting into the proper place. But I digress.
I think the other thing is you have people who have been ingrained into that culture for so long that they really have failed to see what servant leadership is really all about. Again, to your point, they fall on oak leaves or whatever they're, they're going to salute those leaves. I mean, regardless. But when you come into the civilian sector, as you very well know, I can't make you do anything. I mean, you can go tell me to pound sand, I can't fire you because there's so many, legal constraints in terms of, it's got to be written up and then you got to show remediation and all this other stuff. And that means you got to do more work. So you really have to be coy. You have to really find ways to motivate people on their own accord, getting them tied in. And a lot of veterans do find on that, it seems, of leaders, senior leaders. But it was just something worthy of discussion. And I think that it needs more work done in that area. But there was another one that really jumped out at us, or me anyway, us and my team. It was a mouse in my pocket, a cat. But what was really, really concerning to me are females and people of color. I was really taken aback by what I got in responses, particularly, the anytime you do a mixed method for, your audience, it's out here just, academic work, whatever. But the idea behind a survey is to bring out 20, 30 questions, whatever it might be. And then you're going to find things that are popping up. They're becoming trends that you didn't ask. So they're not going to specifically go that way because you didn't ask it. And so when I brought in a mixed method, which is called qualitative research, that's when you do follow-on interviews with people that are a part of your survey. You being, one of them that I had a chance to talk to, which I found really interesting because you're able then to listen to the client, listen to the audience, because they'll tell you everything you need to find. And then what happens is at the end of that, you do 10, 12, 15. You don't have to do a lot of them because the answers become the same. And what we found was that women have, both those populations have unique needs that are not being met in terms of during service and at the end during their transition.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I didn't quite understand. I mean, and I guess that's just the nature of not being a woman. Before this was a podcast, and it was just me having discussions during the beginning of a pandemic with friends on Facebook, and I've since morphed into a podcast. The second one I did was what it's like to be a woman in aircraft maintenance, and I had 3 service members that had served, and I realized there was so many things that they experienced that I never experienced at all whatsoever. And I'm hoping, and I'm sure Ashley's listened because she's a dedicated fan. I'll probably be doing one on racial sort of issues as well in the military and how that kind of affects work performance and certainly transition. Because I think if you have the nature and the quality of your military service, and I don't have any data in front of me, and I don't, besides my own life, I think the nature and the quality of your military service actually probably plays a lot into how well you transition into the civilian sector as well. Like if you had a very positive and fair time in the military where it was like a healthy command climate and you were treated well, I think it's a lot easier to be self-assured and ready to go into the civilian sector because there's like a informal support on the way out. But you did all this research, so I'm interested in what you have to say.
I think what I found initially was women are almost twice as likely than men to go into entrepreneurship, which I thought interesting. I didn't really realize that. That was a big finding for me.
What did the qualitative surveys kind of ferret out for that particular?
Well, it was tied into the other thing that we found out was women typically, the majority of them, I had very few that were retired. Yeah, and I looked for all sorts of, and the ones I brought in two of them were retired women. But again, we have 14% of our fastest growing demographic in the military is women, is 14% and growing. But I would argue, are we putting 14% of this particular population in positions of leadership in terms of general officership and sergeant majors and master guns and whatever the E8s and E9s of the world are, because those are the real influencers. But it was really interesting because the epiphany that I had specifically was, okay, that's the case mathematically. What are we doing about it? And we say, well, we're giving women opportunities and stuff, which, okay, great. I'll push the I believe button, except I may not push that so fast because I would also ask them to say, the push for combat arms, for example. Again, I looked at it on the ground as a company commander, as a junior field grade guy, through a soda straw. And I looked at it, are women capable of being in combat? Physically, emotionally, all that. And we'd always have historically, no. I mean, we talk about it's only men that were in those areas. And we did that because of strength, because of, bravado, whatever, because the policy writers, right, look like guys like you and I. They're older white guys. They're not people who have been put into leadership early on because that's just the nature of our history. So now, when we look at that, when Obama again, I don't get into the politics of it. There's some things I like on every person, but I didn't really align myself with him on that issue, that policy issue, because I was like, I just don't see it.
You're talking about women in combat? Women
in combat arms.
Yep.
And I mean, I don't talking about women going on convoys and on a machine gun. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about sustained patrols as an infantry man or woman. Right. I mean, or an artillery person, living in the dirt for moving. I mean, physical demands. And I mean, that's graduate level. When you're on a patrol base and you're out on the patrol every day, that is a huge tax physically. But the thing is I didn't look at it the way I look at it now. And he was very fortuitous by pushing this issue for equitability, not equality, equitability. It's not so much that we look at this in terms of can women do it or not physically. That's a secondary issue. If there needs to be an established standard, and those people that are on those boards and stuff defining those things, great. Let research direct that to what that should be. And that's not my area of expertise. But my focus has been, if we don't get women, particularly in these MOSs of infantry, artillery, obviously they're in aircraft flying, all that stuff. But if we don't get them in those MOSs, they're not going to progress up the chain growth-wise, professionally, into general officership and into senior staff and staff NCO positions. So that was something that was very, very interesting. And then it also tied in with why they don't stay in past 10 years. Most of them get out before that. And again, I made the assumption, because again, I'm not very smart, and I was like, well, it's because they're probably having children or starting a family. When in actuality, it was the credit or lack of they got as single mothers. A lot of them are single mothers as Lance Corporals, and they make the deal with the gunny in the comm shop that I'm going to get here at 5:30 in the morning. I'll PT, and then I'm going to be working all the way through lunch so I can pick up my daughter at 1500. Well, the problem is that infantry and that messaging that goes on with that team, and how the corporals and Lance Corporals are and PFCs, they see that female in the shop working, but then they don't amongst the, the group. They don't PT together. At noon they're not going out playing, whatever they're playing, softball, whatever they're doing, and they're not going out and working out after after work, or they're going out to eat or something at the chow hall, and so they get that isolation. And then they get looked at as dirtbags.
Yep.
That we're freaking Lance Corporal Bonatsko. Well, she left 1,500. Like, really?
Yeah, must be nice.
Yeah, and that's the mindset, and exactly what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. And so that's where they get tired of it. At least that's what my subjects and participants had said in the interviews. And that's why they go into entrepreneurship, because they're tired of people telling them what to do. They can do it better, and it fits them. It fits their schedules. It fits other types of things in terms of their growth professionally as female leaders and business people, as well as skill development with something they're interested in. So that was really, really something. And one woman, actually two women, said something almost identical on the same day I actually did these interviews, and they said, this hurt me a lot professionally as a Marine officer. They said, if they don't take care of me effectively, like I'm a part of the team. Now, they don't regret their service. None of them did. If they don't treat myself well in terms of me being a part of the team and feeling like I get credit for what I did, how are they going to treat my kids?
Yep.
And that's why they don't stay in longer, because we need them to stay in longer. And that's where I'm really, really a proponent. I don't have there's a lot of solutions and recommendations I made for this work. One of which is potentially, and I know the talk has been with paternity, extended periods of paternity and maternity, allowing them to take a sabbatical, keep them on the payroll, keep them in the club. They have too much experience, but let them take care of their personal lives so that they can come back potentially, maybe put them on a shore duty type, mindset where they're not going to deploy, but they're going to be work, but it doesn't work against them. Yeah. That's the other piece, because again, if they don't fit these wickets, they're not going to get promoted ahead or with their peers. And so those are things that are strong recommendations that I'd like to develop, think group. If we get the social capital aligned, we're going to be in good shape.
I guess I should have also included in your intro that you served in the United States Marine Corps for like 15 years. I feel like I kind of glossed over that. And I don't know if the listeners have pieced it together. They're like, boy, this civilian guy sure knows how to like talk the talk for the military. But I guess it goes back to the more successful you are, the less you kind of are latched on to previous status in the military when you're a veteran. I think part of that is like not necessarily outgrowing, but recognizing that there is a benefit from military service, but it is not your defining event for your life. So that might have been why I think we collectively, I'm gonna blame both of us. We collectively glossed over your military service, and that wasn't intentional, but you've mentioned it a few times here in the conversation, and I want to transition to talk about, when we were talking about the military transition, you mentioned something called Valor Club. And I wonder if you could give us a brief overview, and I'll include a link to the webpage too when this goes live. But what exactly is Valor Club?
Well, the Valor Club is what I wrote my dissertation about in terms of the gap analysis profile. It's an actual innovative solution to a problem. It is a comprehensive living and learning community where we are going to we're building 1,400 units of veteran housing, affordable housing, multifamily homes, as well as single family homes on 200 acres. We're building an education center, a conference center. We want this to be a living environment that is absolutely really ties in everything to our points. With where the gaps are, whether it's corporate, building this relationship with corporate. We also want to bring in all these, the nonprofits to do their great work on our campus, because the veterans need to know how to navigate. And that's where they don't, because everything's been on a base. We want to be able to maybe do an assessment at our place in terms of maybe mental and behavioral health, but then make them go to, they got to learn how to go out in the community to appointments. They've got to get to, those places. So
at first blush, looking at the model, it very much feels akin to in processing the military and almost doing like a basic training where you're going to take care of the housing. Obviously, it's going to be through education benefits, kind of, it seems like either grants or education benefits to the VA kind of paying the housing stipend and stuff. But you're talking about putting like VSOs on site, job training on site, apprenticeship, I assume like mental health providers probably too, or something to that effect, or ultimately is the goal.
Yeah. we want to office them there, hotel them potentially there. We want them to make mission internally,
Right.
their own teams, their own organizations. We want to bring them to the vets. But if you have the linkage, particularly with affordable housing, it's the linchpin for everything.
That's
I mean,
true.
that's the problem is we have all these people doing great work already. They just don't have housing options for them. And that's where, particularly with San Antonio, that's why we went there, because that's where all these companies are going. I mean, Tesla, Oracle, Hewlett Packard, Toyota's already there. You're in San Antonio. These companies, Texas is waging a lot, and that's why we want to work with them, because they their big challenge right now is being able to fill those jobs, not
Yep.
poach from other companies internally to go to these other companies. They've been, Rick Perry and everybody else that's been a part of that big push. Texas rolls it out for vets. But again, we want to cut the beta here. And then we want to be able to go around the country and start, looking at properties, particularly a lot of these small colleges and universities are going to be insolvent here after COVID.
Yep.
I would imagine, again, just reading tea leaves, I would imagine 20% of them could be out of business by the end of this year, potentially.
Yeah, and that makes sense, especially when you're talking about with San Antonio. It's known as a military-friendly town just because of the high veteran population and the industries that are there. But if you can establish through this program like a pipeline for military service to come here to get prepared and to move into the civilian sector working for these companies, it seems to me that that's what we talked about before, where companies have a hard time appealing to veterans, understanding their language, understanding their culture, finding a place for them in manufacturing and all these other things. It seems that if you get this right, you'll probably have very little pushback in implementing this in other places, because companies are going to probably allocate resources towards it, because the dividends they're going to get in a workforce is just going to be astronomical, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, that's to be determined, right? I mean, we want to be able to have companies help them make mission, and that's where, I'm not an economist by any stretch, but as a guy that understands strategy, if we don't fill these companies, manufacturers, we're going to have an artificial inflate. We're going to have an artificial. We're going to go into another recession. Is what's going to happen.
Yep.
Because there's no shortage of goods and services needing to be made. It's just we got a problem with retainment. Well, if you can't backfill them on the front end, I mean, you're never going to backfill the backside. And so that's where I think veterans can lead the charge. I think we really can continue to move the needle in this country. Not only just we took the uniform off, but we're the ones that can fill that gap better than anybody, and I'm really excited about that.
And that seems like that's no different than post-World War II, right? I mean, very much of the economic boom of the 1950s had very much to do with service members returning. I mean, that was part of the Montgomery GI Bill and the VA home loan, was to basically take this very able demographic of the population that's returning from war, give them a stable housing, which that sounds familiar, Mike, and then give them education benefits. That sounds familiar, Mike. And then do those two things and allow them to go into the workforce and make collective money for the GDP, right? I mean, that's essentially what you're talking about.
That's exactly right. But the challenge before us is technology. We can't, back in those days, even all the way through Vietnam, you could go to a mill out of to a
That's
small
fair.
town, work in a mill back where as we're from Oregonians and Washingtonians, you go there, work a warehouser for sweeping floors. And next thing you know, in a couple, 3 years, you're a mid-level floorman on the floor. Today, you can't get into these industries without high-tech training that could take up to 6 months to 2 years to be able to get you. I mean, Amazon. I mean, you can work at Amazon as a PFC with zero skills, but you're going to be making that money,
Right.
and then you're going to be PFC all over again. So if you're a corporal coming out, let's get you into the Valor Club. Let's get you into really nice housing. We're going to have a 9-hole golf course. This is going to be nice, and we're going to have beautiful facilities, top notch. And then let's get you into a program that you're really energetic, about in terms of interest. And you can make good money coming out with no debt. And that's one of the things that I think the biggest lie we've had to a lot of these young people. My generation, which are you what am I? I'm a Gen X. Are you a Gen X guy?
All I know is your beard is gray as fuck and mine is not.
I knew I should have done that Grayson formula.
We're not of the same generation at all.
But what's interesting is and I lost my,
You need to get that Rudy Giuliani hair dye in that beard.
I mean, it just keeps going back. I'm going to tap my head up,
Yeah.
make it look like I got hair.
No,
on the videos.
I'm Gen X. I think I'm Gen X.
Yeah. So I think what's important is really going out of our way, because you can't just say, well, let's just train this group of people, because if they think 50% or more believe that they're not going to be welcomed and they're not going to be understood, why would they go into those, companies? And so I want to work with companies that are in the regional San Antonio area, say, listen, and I don't mean like the Amazons. I mean, guys like Bo Higgins and all those great guys, they're doing great stuff. But those smaller companies that are emerging companies that are small, medium-sized, they don't have this, that HR record or rep and that can understand job descriptions. One of the things I've also found with this research is those small companies don't know how to write a job description to support an 0311, infantryman, or, a Kanakok or something, a tanker, because, let's say I've been sleeping in the dirt for 4 years and in the field, and now I don't want to be outside. I want to be, I'm doing IT tech, and guess what? They require 3 years of Microsoft Office experience. I mean, that guy's not going to have that. So why do you put it in there? Because then they're going to see it and they're not even going to apply. And then they're wondering why they don't get vets. So we want to really take that time to sit in there with their HR departments and say, listen, let's culturalize not just the veteran to go into your community, but let's grab the people that you already have, so they'll understand and they can develop a network internally, not the barbecue twice a year. Thanks, veterans. If you're a veteran, stand up. That doesn't cut it. If you really want to hire this population, you got to create a workforce that understands us. And that's a two-way street, not just us understanding you. You got to understand us. And then guess what you're going to get? You're going to get a well-adjusted, well-trained, somebody that's safe, that knows they're going to get the support they need. They can get the time off they need, Chris, hey, I know you're a veteran. I know I'm not a veteran, HR, but here's the deal. I want you to know when you have issues, come see me and let's get you the help you need. You can have the time off. Don't worry about it. And you go, well, man, I don't have any problem, like a lot of them, but we know you will down the road.
Right.
Down the road, maybe you never have it. Great. We hope. But you should know that we're going to take care of you. And that is, they'll take, the population, they'll take a lesser amount of money, knowing that they're going to be taken care of than, a higher paying with, hey, good luck. We'll see you, at the barbecue.
Yeah, that was my experience. When I went from one company to that job working in higher education, I lost 50% of my salary, but I knew it was a positive work culture and it was a veteran-centric sort of program. So it was like I immediately walked into a family and it was all good. And what's also really interesting is I'm going to be talking to Kevin Traw, who's a frequent guest on this program, and he's probably listening right now, and he's on mile 6 of his morning run, hopefully wearing his 20 years done hoodie regalia, running down at Huntington Beach. He's like, boy, his Patreon subscription's really getting awfully specific and stalkerish, but that is what it is. But he worked at United Health Group, and part of what he did for a long time was doing veteran recruitment and hiring and helping that company understand the veteran experience. And he's since expanded to, general hiring and stuff like that. But in my experience working for another company in Boston, they didn't understand the veteran experience. They didn't know how to talk to veterans. They didn't know how to recruit veterans. They didn't know how to read a veteran's resume. And that's a failure of the TAP, of not writing a resume that's easily digestible by the civilian sector. But it's also the civilian sector not reaching across the aisle, so to speak, to meet the veteran halfway and understanding the veteran experience and trying to figure out the value that the veteran can bring to the company.
I think at the end of the day, I want to build a better TAP program. And I think we can do it with the existing programs that we have out. I think SkillBridge, for many of you, your audience, the SkillBridge program can work. It is that linkage between corporate, and the corporate gets a long-term interview with you as an apprentice or as an intern for, it's tough to get they say 6 months before you you terminate, but I don't think you're going to get that necessarily. But if you can get 1 or 2 months, that's a great job interview. And the guy might be a dirtbag. Great. You're going to know company, then don't hire him. But at the end of the day, I think with the SkillBridge program, with our residency program, it's a no-brainer. And in fact, you're not paying for their salaries. The other thing I think DoD is trying to reach out, and I appreciate that, but there's so many holes in the program that we can fill that I'm really excited about that. And I think the other thing I think we need to talk about, I think we need to talk about potentially 4.5-year minimum enlistments, because I think that you can get 4 years with them in the military and then mandatorily keep them on the payroll or do something in conjunction with companies for 6 months after they get out to transition. Is it for everybody? Not necessarily. You can opt out if you have a plan.
And then do the 6 months still in the military if that's what you want to do.
And now they get the support where it's not like, okay, God, I got to get a job. Oh, I can't really apply yet because I can't get off because, you can't time it. If you're like us where you have families and stuff, you're going, I got to have a job before I get out. I'm terminal. I'm going to be, without money. And it's like, that's a stress point, and it brings up a lot of garbage.
And that's a good idea too, because the 4.5-year or whatever the enlistment is, stick 6 months on the end, part of the contract, and the skill bridge is literally cooked into the deal, or the skill bridge equivalent sort of program. Because one of my concerns when I saw skill bridge was there's no way my commander is going to approve this, because much as we talked about, the DoD is concerned with the mission. And when you've signaled you're going to get out, the DoD is like, okay, well, I'm going to use you for the mission as much as possible. So a lot of times for a commander, especially when you're under sequestration and continuing resolution, so your budgets are like 10% lower because of continuing resolution, another 10% because of sequestration, and the ops tempo is high because you're launching new stuff into new places, even though you don't have the resources for the last things you were doing. Now you're asking the commander to let a qualified E5 spend the last 6 months of his contract. Like,
it ain't gonna happen.
It might one or two, but then what if it's like the first guy does, and he's like, man, this program's great, and he tells all of his peers over Facebook at his last unit, and they're all going to the commander. The commander's like, hold up, like, I didn't fucking plan for 73 E1 through E6s to leave 6 months early. Like, I'm not prepared for that, and I think skill bridge with the permissive aspect doesn't scale. I think at least for the Air Force Personnel Center, it's too much of a wild card because you don't know who's going to apply for it and who's not. So they can't preemptively prepare to backfill, personnel billets and stuff like that. But what you're talking about, where you tack 6 months onto any contract period, and skill bridge is going to be part of that doesn't necessarily require commander approval. I think that's smart, because then the commanders know at 4 years you'll lose them anyway. And then the DoD's on the hook for the other 6 months, but the commander's already wiped his hands of you, and the personnel backfill is already kind of in work. So,
well, and maybe you, and again, I don't have the answers. That's why I want to bring smart people to the table, because I think maybe I know that the commands are different in terms of active duty versus reservists. Maybe they transition into a reserve component.
It's a good idea too.
Several months. What we need is accountability for the individuals once they leave. Again, 40% of our people aren't going into VA that are post 9/11 veterans. Where are these veterans at? We don't know unless they have their information somewhere. That's not good. We want to know where they're at so they're taken care of, so that they have these issues and they're not going out, suck, start 9 mils. Boris Coons, who actually runs it, great guy, Navy guy. We've talked I met him almost a couple years now. The vision is good. The housing component is the hard part with the skill bridge, because if they're, people say, well, they're in San Antonio, they're already at joint bases, they got 5 bases there. Yeah, but I don't think our audience coming into Valor Club is going to be people who are already in San Antonio. No, because they already have someone to live, and they're old. They're older. They're people like us who are, going to retire. I think the majority of our population is going to come from the Braggs, the Blisses, the Pendletons, Bennings, all the other, locations that we have, Carson, Dix, all these other places where they're 22 to 34. They're in that range. And most of them are from deployable bases, which means that they're either infantry, artillery, tankers, they're combat arms MOSs, which don't have any transitional skills anyway, in terms of, a direct entry into a particular trade. They need those skills, and we could provide it. But again, this isn't free. I mean, we've got $60 million that we're capital infrastructure that we're building for the infrastructure and the vertical construction here in 6 months as we start moving dirt, which is exciting. But I got to get people to pay for it. And we're working with San Antonio. It's a joint venture, a P3, we call it, public-private partnership, so that we can make it affordable. These things are, the BAH there for you going to school there is $16.45 for post 9/11. We're going to charge about $1,000. for ours. So it's going to be well below the BH rate. It is affordable. We want this population socioeconomically to go there, where they can get acclimated and they can stay as long as they want. Now, I would say that our mission is going to be getting them into home ownership. We want to get them out of there so that they can buy a home and they can start building equity, because as you know, we're both not necessarily economists, but that's how you build personal wealth.
It is
having home ownership. And that's why, having these programs, in San Diego, which I have to kind of laugh. I love to work in San Diego, but the businesses are leaving. They're not in California. They're leaving that are in manufacturing because there's no margins and the taxation's brutal. It's a political mess, and the cost of living. They'll never buy a house there. And that's again another artificial inflation thing we have as these boomers and everybody, not boomers, but even millennials and whatever the next one is. They don't own anything, and that's where we want to get them into these communities, get them out of San Diego. I love San Diego. I love LA. Get them out of there. They can't buy a home here. Get them into property ownership, build a career, and then move into, these spaces that are nice and warm and have high taxes. So, I'm all supporting, again, with skill. I'm all about it. We got to work together though. That's where I think that, and find innovative solutions to problems. So that's what I like.
So when do you guys plan to be breaking ground? When do you think it's going to be up and running?
Well, we're looking at 6 months from now. So probably 6 months, probably June-ish, we'll be moving dirt. But again, we got a lot of stuff cooking right now. We've got a company that does technology that's interested in putting a 5G network on our community. Again, we've been talking about this. There's nothing that's written yet, but we're really excited about, the community wants to be involved. We're working with a potential couple banks, one of the local regional banks. Yet again, I can't share with them by name, but be advised, we're really excited because we want to get U.S.A.'s down there. We're waiting for conversations a little bit later after we get kind of situated, but we want this to be an interoperable model. We want this to be a model that is San Antonio's model, but again, it's a scalable model. We can get wherever. We can go anywhere there's manufacturing and jobs. People can get into Toyota, 3 months training as a mech or tech, come out making 60 grand. And guess what? There's no risk, and it's all upward trajectory. Our Marine sailors, airmen, they're going to get into management down the road. That's the way we're built. We want the responsibility. Again, we just got to work together with the companies, and I think that'll come with time, because that's what the data will show. If I can show that Chris's and Mike's of the world, we don't quit after a year or two. We stay engaged with companies for 5, 6, 8 years. That's why that longitudinal data is so important, to show that we're good at what we're doing. This is evidence-based. So we're really proud about that. So,
and then I also wanted to ask, because before we recorded today, you kind of ran me through a slideshow about your dissertation, and some of the stuff in there was really, it wasn't necessarily eye-opening, but when you put all that information together, and I think that's what happens a lot of the times, is people see the pieces of the puzzle, but until you put all those pieces together, you realize the magnitude and how everything is kind of interconnected, where it's the society of the military versus society, outside the military. You're talking about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like those things have to be met before you can achieve the greater things. Like, I appreciate how much effort and passion you have for this topic. And, as a veteran that transitioned myself, and some of my listeners are recently transitioned or about to transition, based on your research and what you know of the transition process now, and until we get better at it, what's your best advice for what a soon-to-be separated service member can do to prepare? I know.
I think I should put that in the book, and you and I will cut the day, co-authors, and then we'll just go retire and drink Mai Tais. That's a great question. That's the $1 million question, isn't it? I mean, I think as early a planning capability as you can. Pray to God that you're not overseas in your transition. It's hard to network as it is. It's building a civilian network. Again, that's what we're trying to build at the Valor Club. We don't come out with a network at all. We don't. It doesn't work. It's just hard. That's how you get jobs. It's building informational interviews, meeting people, asking the right questions. You don't have to have the answer to it, but ask the right questions. But you got to be prepared to buy insurance. You're going to have to be prepared to manage your fiscal budget there. You're going to have to learn, cost of living index. You're going to need to know what, original, like these market trending, local regional trends, is industry moving out of there? Or is it, this is a graduate level problem. It's not done at TAP. It is clearly articulated that it's not shown there. They don't know about cost of living variables. They can write a resume, but if you can't manage money, first of all, most of them leaving don't even know how to cook because they've lived at the chow hall for 4 years or on the field, eating T-rats or whatever they're eating. You can't eat out every day. Okay, that's a simple thing that you and I go, as adults, that's pretty good. Well, guess what? It's expensive. And you need to learn how to, eat, nutritional foods. You need to know about, how to access mental and behavioral health. Where do you go? Those are things, I guess, to your $1 million questions. I have no absolute answer to it, but I would say, it's preparation, getting with somebody that's already out there. If you have that luxury, somebody particularly that's older than you, don't be grabbing somebody that's your same age. Get with an older veteran, somebody that's been in the industry for a while. Don't expect and don't feel like you got to have one one job that you want to go into. It's okay to say, you know what? I don't know. I could do about 4 things and be happy, and say, okay, great. You have to go to college right away. Get a trade where you can make some good money. And then if you want to go to school at night, go to school at night. There's a lot of these programs now, particularly they'll pay for the school yourself through the Department of Labor, Workforce Commission, these, the ones that I've been in contact with. And there's a lot of resources, but they're not going to tell you that at TAP because not that they don't want to tell you that, but the gunny or whoever the GS 11 is or 12 that's teaching in the really nice suit, he or she not going to know about market indexes. They're not going to know about regional cost of living stuff. Those are things that, don't go. I mean, I love LA. I'm an LA commissioner, but you want to be an actor is a great ambition, but I would recommend, there's a lot of homeless vets that are right now homeless because they want to be actors and in the industry. And so I would say get something that you can, whether it's cutting hair professionally or you're working at Metro. I got things out there for people that can cut your teeth with, that you can get into careers, because jobs you got to get into a career you love.
Yeah, I think that's probably my biggest piece of advice is, there's nothing wrong with getting a job that's comfortable, that pays the bills. I did it. I worked F-16s for 20 years, and then I retired, and I immediately worked contract work for F-16s at the base that I was at forever. It was comfortable work, and it paid well. But I was like, this is not, when I'm dying, when I'm on my deathbed, this is not going to be my contribution to the world. It's just not. Yeah. And I had no shame in paying the bills, in some cases, in that case, making more than the bills required.
Sure.
But my intrinsic drive was towards being a lawyer. And part of it was, I asked myself, what did I want to be when I grew up, when I was like 15 years old? Or another question I'll ask people sometimes like young airmen, when you first thought about joining the military, what job did you see yourself going into? Which one in your mind was the thing that you wanted? Because very often the military has, a totally different plan for you.
You're saying the recruiter's going to, man, that is so low.
But you spent however long you're in the military, between 3 years to 30 years, doing the job they told you to do because they needed you to do it. When you separate, that's your chance to decide what you're going to do, what you're going to be, and what's going to like give you that sense of purpose and contribution to the world. And it's scary because you don't know where to go. You don't know what to do. And I think a lot of people also will just default to like a business degree. And I'm not slighting a business degree. I think my undergrad's kind of like a business degree. I don't know. But find the thing that you're really, really interested in. And much like you said, do the informational interviews, test the waters, find out what a day in the life is like, and be brave and pay the bills with the one job that you may not want to define you, but work towards the thing that you always wanted to be, and the schooling that's required or whatever else, or the location, and start working towards it, because you're free. You get to make that decision. And much like you said, that motivation, if that's your destiny, if that's what you see yourself as, you're going to be able to get the degree you need, and you're going to be able to get the job you want, and you're going to be able to get the position you want, because that's where all your motivation lies. Don't just assume that since you work F-16 for 20 years, you have to work at the airport, or you have to do this contract work, you have to go over to Saudi or whatever. I mean, if that's what you want to do, that's fine, but I would imagine you would have separated if that's what you wanted to do. That's how I see it.
Well, how many people in your network, your personal network, that have gotten out, especially a lot of guys that got out after 4 years, and I'm talking about on the officer side of the house. So these guys all had degrees. They became officers in the Marine Corps. They did 4 years, a lot of them, then got out. And literally, I could probably say half of them that I know personally have called me back after, I've been involved in them, we're a for-profit, but I've been a nonprofit as well as for-profit. And they're just like, dude, I want to get involved. I want to, I started my own company. I got a contracting company, we're doing stuff and building. We're really successful, but God, I just don't feel like I'm finding joy,
Yep.
And I think that term finding joy, and like say, what you're saying is very wise. That's a very, wise statement you just made, because at the end of the day, what do you're on a deathbed. I couldn't have told you the direction I'm going. I had an MBA from U.S.A. I couldn't get a job coming out making what I made in the military because I didn't have a personal brand. So I got another problem. I've got too much experience on one end. And by the way, losing jobs to people who've been in the industry for 15 years. And I haven't done that stuff. I mean, I've figured out, but they always get hired for 6-figure jobs. They don't in LA, those jobs are like pyramided out. There's not that many of them.
Yep.
And it affects your psyche. It did me. And so I would say to them, if you're a prayerful person, you're a spiritual person, pray about it. I would say really, really relax and enjoy the ride. And I know that's hard. I could not have written a script better than what I've had, because I've worked my tail off and I've put myself out there. To your point, I've volunteered for things. I've been on boards. I've been on, it just finds you. And so, but I got to tell you, this helps my PTS, and I struggle with this, with the deployment, the 6 deployments that I've had. This helps me. I find joy in this, and it's medicine for me.
Yep.
And if you're like me, and many of you guys are, you and your listeners, I mean, great Americans, give it a shot. You just got to have faith in the system. But by preparing yourself around people, getting into a tribe, get into the tribe. Don't stay isolated, because there's nothing's going to help you with that. But get out to your program, get out to a mentor, find a mentor. That takes work. Try to get that done before you get out. Somebody that may or may not be in your field that you want to go into, that's great. But just the experience of what they went through is invaluable. And you'll get, it will really set you up in the days and weeks and months and years that you have as a civilian.
Yeah, and I'll put it out there too, because right now I don't have a lot of listeners. So this is the small audience's opportunity to take advantage of me. But if you have any questions, shoot me a message on the page. You guys know how to reach me on the Facebook page until I get too big for my britches, in which case I'll have an assistant or something. I don't know. But man, Mike, the time flew, and I know you're a busy man. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to sit down and talk about both your research plus Valor Club, and it was just invaluable, and I really appreciate it. And again, I'll tell you, I'll extend to you what I extend to some of my other guests, not all of them, so you're still exclusive. If there's anything you want to talk about or anything that you're passionate about, you just shoot me an email, and you are welcome to come on, and you can use my platform however you want, because I'm all about getting passionate people for the veteran community and do their work, and me help them. So, well,
I appreciate that. And one of the things I do want to do, I have a book that I'd like to develop for transitioning members, not just a resource book like everyone's got a resource book out there, but my book is focused on learning. It's how to really maximize your learning. And again, it's based on educational psychology research. And I wish I'd have had this knowledge when I was in middle school, but it really, my vision for this is, I want it to be in your hip pocket so that you use it continually and wear it out. I'll send you another book when I finish it, I'll send you a new one. You wear it out, I'll send you a new one. Because I think it's a book that we have so much more. We are so much smarter than we think we are. We really are. And in terms of the cognitive architecture that we have and the ability to retain information and lifelong learning. And we will be lifelong learners until you step in the grave. And whether you're transitioning or you're getting another career, or we're always, I don't care if you're tying flies for the first time, I want you to retain information better than you ever have. So that's my vision for my next project that I'd like to do. So down the road.
All right. Well, that sounds awesome. I know we talked about that during the survey, where I think that was one of the first things you talked about was all the different ways that people learn and kind of the barriers and obstacles. And if you can understand how you learn, your success is just going to go through the roof. And that's what I think we had a meeting of the minds very, very briefly, even though my contracts professor said that doesn't actually exist. So other than that, but
More to follow.
Yeah. Thanks again, Mike. And also congratulations on the doctorate. Like, I know you said that anybody can do it, but not everybody does it. So it is special, and it does take time and dedication, persistence, and you earned it.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Chris, and having me. And like I said, I look forward to the next one.
Okay. Thanks. Adios.